He's editorial director for the Huffington Post. Thank you so much for being here, sir. First up, this is a war that had been declared over. How difficult a position is the president in now, potentially reopening that book domestically and then also on the world stage? Is this going to trigger blowback?
Well, in every respect, it's a difficult situation for the president who just left the White House a little while ago. I can say to you from here on the North Lawn that it looks pretty bleak in every respect. Politically, the American people have no interest, every poll shows, in sending troops back to Iraq. So that's off the table for the president. And indeed, his entire candidacy and presidency was based on ending the war in Iraq. So politically, he has no room militarily to maneuver, at least very little. We have all kinds of military assets in the region, but his political support for using any of them is going to be very low. That's number one. And in military terms, it's not clear what we can do. Without boots on the ground, without intelligence on the ground, without eyes to see, human eyes to see, you don't bomb indiscriminately or on targets you think are appropriate in Iraq because of the potential of collateral damage, because of the possibility of making the situation worse. And as Richard Engel was reporting just a little while ago from Iraq, you don't trust the Maliki government to necessarily call in the airstrikes on the right people. So militarily it's difficult. And in terms of global diplomacy, there's no interest around the world from the good guys, the people we would consider allies, in doing anything to try to put a lid on an increasingly difficult and explosive situation in Iraq.
And look, what you're describing gets the president a lot of flack from some more hawkish elements on the Hill, but you highlight exactly why his caution may be wise. That's also the case because in the last 24 hours, we've seen exactly how extreme these ISIS elements are. They've actually declared the border between Iraq and Syria no longer exists, in their opinion. Do you think that's a realistic prospect? Could they redraw the map in the Middle East?
Well, the maps of the Middle East, as we know, were drawn in modern times literally on sand. They were a fiction in many ways to begin with, and they cover over sectarian and ethnic differences that go back literally thousands of years. It was a hope and a fiction in the George W. Bush years that installing essentially a Shiite government in Iraq that government would somehow be a government of reconciliation and unification with the Sunnis and indeed the ethnic Kurds in the northern part of the country. And what we're seeing now is that after the Americans have left, after the alliance of other countries has left, after the Maliki government has been left to its own devices, first by George W. Bush and then by Barack Obama, that things are falling apart. The Maliki government did not include the Sunnis in any meaningful way. They did not include the Kurds in any meaningful way. And now we're seeing the consequences of that as the resentment of the Sunnis provided fertile territory for the Islamic State to grow, not only in Iraq, but also now in Syria.
And we're going to be looking closely in a moment at exactly how fraught that history is. But right now, in the present day, too, we're seeing all of the political blowback unfolding even today and even right before the president's remarks. Take a listen to what Mike Rogers said earlier on today, for instance.
These are al-Qaeda-minded individuals. They would kill Americans in a heartbeat. And so we need to disrupt that momentum.
How does the president best respond to some of those elements that just are constantly calling for more intervention?
Well, by making the case that it was the lack of care and the lack of knowledge of these deep divisions, both religious and ethnic, sectarian and ethnic, in the first place, the problems we're in now. The lack of sophisticated understanding or desire to know the sophisticated understanding on the ground by the Bush administration created the kind of situation that he's had to deal with. Now, there may be questions to ask about how vigilant in the last year or two the Obama administration has been. The Obama administration in the region has been concerned about Afghanistan. There's, I think, a certain desire on the part of the American leadership as well as the country to forget about Iraq. But the root of the problem was the fact that we went in and the way we went in to begin with in 2003. And it's been it's what got the president elected, Ronan. It's the mistakes of the Bush administration that got the president elected. He thought he'd ended it properly and tied it off, if you will, almost like after a surgery. But now it's bleeding again, and does he bear some responsibility? Of course, he's president. But the roots of the modern political and military and diplomatic problem in that region begin with George W. Bush.
Howard Fineman, that is exactly a succinct summary of the president's philosophical dilemma here. Just weeks ago, he was at West Point saying he wants a lighter footprint around the world. This obviously makes that difficult.